Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Trek Drek. We're still in quarantine, so we're going to talk about some Star Trek, because why not? Star
I'm
Trek's
not in
great.
quarantine. I'm the eye of the storm.
You're the eye of the storm. I'm the eye of this room right now.
Yeah, we're going to talk about hey, first of all, we're going to talk about, he's your host, Grew, and I'm your other host, Jim.
Star Trek is interesting because where Star Wars has, exploded and it's one of the biggest franchises of all time. Star Trek has still endured, but it hasn't endured in the same kind of limelight. But I think the reason it does endure, it's more than the thematic implications. It's more than the ethics. It's more than this utopian idea of the future, which is quite frankly breath of fresh air considering the apocalypse we see happening around us and in so much of our fiction.
Yeah.
It's a nice change. That's part of it. I think in spite of all that stuff, the science, which is often cutting edge, in spite of all of this, I think the thing that brings people back to this is the wealth of great characters, not just good characters, great characters. We went through our list of who we would put on our crew, and it was hard.
Perfect.
It was hard to make that list because there are so many great characters in Star Trek, and I think at its heart,
I don't want them all.
Yeah, you want them all. Just one big giant, Death Star full of Star Trek characters. Just hanging out.
That's the thing. Star Wars is generally better at movies than it is at TV shows. I mean, I watched other TV shows as a kid. But the point is, it's an epic struggle, a galaxy-spanning struggle between good and evil, and that lends itself well to big special effects and action, and a 2-hour movie that you can put it in. Whereas Star Trek is about people.
Star Wars characters are very, very. I don't mean this as a pejorative. I mean it as a strength for a movie. They're very simple. They're very archetypal. They're great. I love a lot of these characters, but you get them very fast, and that's what you need for an adventure where you go in swinging on ropes and throwing your laser sword around. That's what you need for a good old swashbuckling adventure. Who is this guy? Oh, he's look at how he's sitting. He's the smuggler. I get who he is. I'm on board. I want to see what fun stuff this guy does. But with Star Trek, you have this long-form serialized platform, which is how it began, and it's through many, many, many different iterations of TV shows. They have a new one coming out as well, an animated one now. Lower Decks, I think it's called. Yeah, it's about
that was a TNG episode.
Yeah, it's a series now. It's a series now. It's an animated series. They're doing
That was one of my favorites across all of Star Trek's series. That was one of my favorite episodes because you see, especially the guy who's the bartender. And he calls Commander Riker by his first name. It's like, but he's second in command of the ship. Yeah, but when he comes in here, he's just a guy. He wants me to treat him like he's Will. So, and that's the thing about
that was an interesting episode,
Star Trek characters is that they're just when you think you've got them figured out, they do something different. They're layered. They're not simple. Yeah. They're complicated characters
because they have all of this time to you do something in an episode and it kind of resets, but no, it doesn't really. Everything kind of builds on each other a little bit, even though you're still working in a television format. I know the kind of new series they're basically big movies like Picard, which we both saw. That's basically a 10-hour movie, really, when you get down to it. But I mean,
most television is these days.
Most television is, but for the majority of its inception, Star Trek always had that. We're kind of going back to the status quo at the end of things. Some things change, but things are kind of resetting. But they're doing enough development where the characters do progress, just kind of by notches, and that's kind of the strength of the show. And they're able to, in this science fiction medium, take characters to wherever. Do you want to see what happens if Picard lives a completely different lifetime? We'll do that a couple times for you. You want to see what happens if one of the characters thinks that, reality is not in sync with what they think is going on. We can do that as well. You want to have some ethical dilemmas where characters are kind of friends, but they're clashing. You can do that. So you're able to explore a lot more. And I think that's just the advantage of television. I think if you can pair like Ahsoka Tano or Ezra Bridger with Luke Skywalker, you'll find them to be more nuanced because they've had more time to grow and develop, and that's just the nature of the medium. But yeah,
Well,
but it is to the
it
credit.
was, although now television, like the new Picard series, while I liked it up until the second half of the last episode, where it turned into Transformers to me, it takes place over a very short period of time.
Yeah.
Which I mean, if you look at Netflix Marvel, for example, I mean, it takes each season of Daredevil takes place over a few days, whereas the Next Generation, the idea is that a season took place over the course of an entire year, and they refer to this in generations when Data is going, "Oh, I get that joke, that joke you told me during the mission to Farpoint, Data, that was 7 years ago." And that's the idea that, okay, so there isn't that through line that you get in Picard where, hey, the next episode picks up like a few minutes after the last episode. Whereas in TNG, there's a couple of weeks in between each episode. If you think that there was 26 episodes and it takes place over the course of a year, that's an episode every 2 weeks. So of course you're not going to be necessarily talking about all the things that happened 2 weeks ago, but you do talk about some of them. Data still has a cat. They do talk about a joke that happened.
Yeah.
But it's spaced out. It's slices of life rather than a tiny portion of life. It's slices over a long period of time.
No, I think the series that actually did the most for permanent character progression was DS9. Obviously, you have characters going through a big war by the end of it. Virtually everyone is different by the end of that show. Some characters have gone, some characters have left us in different ways, but for the most part, everybody has gone on a journey and they've come out the other side different than where they began. I would say more so than any other series of Star Trek.
Well, I think that's because in the late 90s and early aughties, the whole television landscape was changing. You were starting to get more TV shows with overarching storylines because you got in the early to mid 90s, you got Babylon 5, which was a show with a story arc spanning the entire series. Deep Space Nine's, after its third season, basically everything was about the war. Yeah. And then in the early 2000s, you got into Lost and The Sopranos, which the story goes on from episode to episode, more like a daytime soap opera rather than episodical like the original Star Trek was. Each week is a different adventure. And that led into, well, that combined with online television broadcasting like Netflix or any other platforms like that, the advent of binge watching, you can't really have that, oh, the last episode was 2 weeks ago, this new episode, you have to wait for the new episode. Cliffhangers don't work anymore. They worked back then. That's great. But now it's people watch 5, 6, 7 episodes at a time. So we're in a different landscape, and we can't necessarily go back to what the Next Generation was like, because that was over the cusp of 1990, 87 and 94, I think. And people watch television differently, which is why Picard is different than TNG. Yeah.
Now, do you have a preference in terms of the television you consume? Do you prefer serialization? Do you prefer when it's more episodic, where we're just going on? I guess Doctor Who still very much is. They always have New Who always has an overarching kind of bad guy to face at the end kind of thing, but every episode is pretty much self-contained. Even
they're kind of seasonal, but they do kind of have an adventure of the week. But I think that's written into the story, because at the end of the episode you get into the TARDIS and you show up somewhere else.
Oh yeah, it's the DNA of the show. I'm just wondering, like, do you have a preference in terms of the media you consume?
Well, I like binge watching not as much as the next guy, but I do kind of miss the Next Generation. I really enjoyed Star Trek Picard, but the thing is, it's very different than the Next Generation.
Yeah,
And I grew up
it
with
feels
that.
very
I
different,
love
yeah.
those stories. I love the fact that, so with Picard, yeah, they fleshed out the characters mostly in flashbacks because there isn't enough time to digest what happened because, well, nicely, they spaced it out. They had an episode a week for 10 weeks?
Yeah.
They didn't drop it the whole season at once. So there was time to digest what happened, but there's no time for the character to be affected by what happened.
Yeah.
Because next week's episode picks up right where this week's episode left off. Whereas in the Next Generation, the next episode, unless it's a 2 or 3 part story, the next episode, a couple of weeks has passed in the character's life. So they've come to grips with what happened in the last episode. And they're not fretting about it anymore. It's like, okay, well, that was then. Got to move on to what we're doing now. As opposed to, well, I mean, the entire length of the Picard series took place in maybe just a couple weeks in the character's perspective.
Yeah. I mean, that's interesting too. Like you have 10 weeks to tell a complete story, whereas you would have seasons to explore characters, which was very different. I would say the earlier Star Treks were more character focused. They were more about looking at that character. Let's take this character, put them in a situation, maybe pair them up with someone else, see what happens. How do they react to it? That was more the focus. Whereas in things like Picard and Discovery, it's more about what's the situation happening around us. How are we getting through that? It's not so much, I would say Picard is not so much about Picard, if that makes any sense. It's more about the kind of the
universe pivoting around him.
Exactly. The whole android plot is at the forefront, and Jod Vosh and all that, where Picard he's basically just he's more like your way in character. He's more like he's experiencing this, and he's making steps to go off on this adventure. But at the same time, it's not really about Picard.
Because it's about the things that are happening around him. It takes away some of his agency.
Yeah.
Because in
whereas in TNG you have things like the best of both worlds, and then the episode immediately preceding that, where he's taken over by the Borg, he becomes Locutus, and the next episode you see he has a whole episode to just deal with that. And not just that, his family as well, and his relationship with his brother, and all this kind of stuff. And it's just, you take a whole episode just to, I mean, they explored some other stuff. They looked at some other people, Worf goes back to his parents and all that stuff as well, which is fun. I like the Rozhenkos. But it's mostly about how the heck is this affecting you? You're basically going through PTSD. Like, how does this affect our main character?
Well, the nice thing is
which Picard doesn't do.
They had 7 main characters. So if this week is about Picard and Riker, next week is about Worf and Data. And so you have a chance to, like, okay, that crap that happened with them last week, we can catch our breath a second. Whereas now in the Picard series, as much as I liked it, it was a 10-hour long action show.
Yeah.
There was one interlude in the middle where he meets up with Riker, and that was really nice, but I wanted to see more of that because I wanted a bit more downtime. It's hard to catch your breath because things keep happening all on top of each other.
And at that moment, he had just met Soji at that point too. He had just met her, and that would have been a great time for them to actually be, who the heck are you? Like, why are you? They don't really do that. It's more focused on him and Riker and Deanna, who are already established and fan favorites, and it's great to see them again and their feral kid and making pizza and all that. It's all fun stuff. But I mean, in terms of actually exploring these characters and what they're going through, not so much, even though there's downtime.
It gives the impression that every moment of Picard's life is so packed with stuff happening. Like, I think Picard would have had a heart attack before he was 30.
Yeah. Like, do you remember the time he went on vacation and he couldn't even catch a break on vacation? He like fell
Yeah,
in love with this, and there's this con going on, and there's this archaeology plot. I don't remember the details of it. It's been a while since I saw the
yeah.
episode, but
That's where he meets Vash,
yeah. But
and
he just wants
I
to read his book on a beach.
he
Just
wants
let him read his book on a beach.
but Riker trolled him by
Yeah.
getting the statue, and then Vash approaches him and propositions him, because apparently if you display the statue, that means you want Jamaharon, and so Riker was trolling him, and then she's conning him because he's interested in archaeology, and she wants to get the thing, and he wants to put it in a museum. And then the aliens show up, and then the Ferengi show up because they want to take it and sell it. And I'm like, this is Picard's vacation.
This is his off
What the
day.
hell?
Yeah.
So, but that's the thing. The next episode was probably about Geordi. Maybe the next, I can't remember exactly. I could probably look it up. But Picard goes back to work. And most of work is he comes on the bridge in the morning, he gets a report, and they fly around on their next mission. It's not, I've got a friend who's deployed in the Pacific right now. Mostly, it's just like a day job.
Yeah.
Except you're not in an office building, you're floating on the ocean or floating in space for Picard. And most of what he does is read reports and look at computer printouts. That's kind of refreshing that, okay, sometimes he's bored as well, just like me. Sometimes stuff happens, and it's like, oh my God.
I like the idea of there's more that happens that you don't see. Like even adventurous stuff. Like there's this great line in it's from one of the all-time favorite new Doctor Who episodes, the Weeping Angels one. What's it called? Blink? Yeah, Blink.
Yeah.
Where they see the Doctor at the end. He's barely in it, but he runs by at the end, and they catch him. And he's like, "Wait, just a minute. I have to deal with three things. Well, three things and a lizard." And he just kind of disappears, and there's another adventure happening off screen. I like that. One show that does that really well. It basically flips that idea on the head, where almost all of the high action adventure happens off screen. And all you really see is their downtime is the Venture Brothers. It's an animated Adult Swim cartoon. It's basically what superheroes do in their off time. They're kind of a Hardy Boys, Johnny Quest kind of vibe going on there, kind of like old serialized stuff, adventure type stuff going on there. But basically every time you see them, they're like, brushing off some like burning cimbers or embers, and then they're like settling down to play pool or whatever the heck they're doing. It's like a lot of the time the action is happening off screen. There still are, set pieces and whatnot, but a lot of time they're just dealing with regular mundane stuff. And then they've already had the adventure, and we don't get to see that. We get to see their garage sale. I'm a mad scientist. I'm having a garage sale. Here's my ray gun. I want $5 for it. And that's what you see,
And sometimes that's the interesting stuff. That's the character development. That's why I like Lower Decks in the episode of
the
Next
a good
Generation,
episode.
because it's not the guys who are making the monumental decisions that might get people killed. I mean, it eventually does. And the lower ranked characters are involved in the big thing that's happening. But mostly it's about them having drinks and, whose boyfriend is cheating on who, and the guy's bucking for a promotion, and it turns out that the nurse is pregnant and that her boyfriend's going to propose to her. And of course the Bajoran woman it was really nice because it's from the previous Wesley Crusher episode where he's at the academy and the other pilot gets killed. And so they brought the girl back.
Yeah, that was nice.
And Picard's like, how did you get on my ship? I know exactly how you got on my ship. I asked for you.
Yeah.
And
so that's interesting. Even with these minor characters who only show up for a couple episodes, they're still given room to develop. They're still given room to grow because you have, 26 episodes, whatever it is, a season. You have time to just go on shore leave, play a game of baseball, maybe fall in love with a holodeck program. You can do all this stuff, and you have room to breathe. And I think that's the thing, because Star Trek isn't all just about action. Sometimes it's about people just talking to each other, and that's the
In
crux
fact,
of the episode.
it's
That's the
less
conflict.
I think it's less about the action because
Yeah, exactly.
early
Exactly.
the Next Generation, they didn't do action very well. I mean, maybe a fist fight, but if the ship was under attack, I mean, it's two ships
Yeah.
standing side by side, pounding at each other like heavyweight boxers.
Yeah.
Whereas, like you mentioned, things happening off stage can be even more interesting, and that's generally what happened in Lower Decks. There's also a 5th season Babylon 5 episode where the two central characters are two repair guys, and they're sent somewhere to fix something, but then an attack happens. This alien race that attacks the space station, and you're still seeing it from these guys' perspective. They get called to command and control to fix somebody's panel, and they're under fire. So the commander is running around, do this and that and this and that, and they fix the panel, and then they run out of there because they don't want to be in the commander's way. But it follows them, not the commander. And then the alien shows up and is shooting, and they're just looking out a portal. They get stuck in an area because everything's locked down during the attack, and so they're just looking out the portal, and they see the flashes of light, and they're like, I wonder who's winning. I don't know. I hope it's us. And it's really interesting because it's just two guys talking while the action is taking place outside a window.
Yeah. It's the idea that there's interesting things. It makes the world feel bigger, honestly. Like something like Lower Decks is like, yeah, it's not just about your heroes. There's the population of the ship, it's a couple hundred, right? And there's people on there with families and all this stuff going on. It's a giant starship. There's all these other lives happening, like even on just this location that you don't get to see. It makes the world feel bigger, more lived in. And that again goes back to kind of my central premise, where Star Trek it's all about the characters. It's not about whether you're in the room where the action is happening. It's what are you going through right now? Wherever whatever character the camera is focused on right now, what are they going through? And somehow the writers almost always find a way to make that interesting. There's very few, like, apart from very, very minor characters where you can't really delve into them that much, there's very few bad characters in Star Trek. There's very few characters who are like annoying, or they're completely unlikable. I have a couple, but in the vast majority of,
they generally redeem themselves. Like I found in the first season of TNG can be hard to watch because of how annoying Wesley Crusher is. Why? Not because he's not likable or adorable, but he's better than the crew at everything they do. Not just what he does, but what they do. He's perfect at everything. But then later on, when he goes to the academy and he gets somebody killed, and then he shows up in the last season where he's like, we shouldn't be taking natives off of their own land and throwing them away somewhere else. This is wrong. And he goes against Picard's orders, and then he leaves. He resigns his commission. Yeah. He redeemed himself. He's like an annoying character, but then he developed into something worthwhile.
And the brilliant thing about that, the prior episode you mentioned, I mean, they're both good examples, but the brilliant thing about that is they take the thing which could be seen as a weakness in terms of character building, which is making them too perfect, making them a Mary Sue. I've heard that been said about Wesley before. He's too much of a Mary Sue. He's too perfect. Fine, there's validity there. But they take that and his drive for perfection to be as good as he can be. And again, this idea that only people who are really brilliant, really perfect, really geniuses can be in Starfleet. And they turn that into a liability because it gets someone killed. And even at the end of that episode, Picard's like, maybe we're demanding too much of everybody. Maybe this is not reasonable to ask a human being to be up to this standard. Like, because his whole thing is the reason he gets somebody killed is he wants to set an example for everybody else. Like, even though he does this horrible thing, he manslaughters a guy, following orders from another guy, is to be the best he can be. Like, it's so interesting. It's so well done. Any other show would have screwed that up.
and the idea that everybody has to be amazing, has to be, Stephen Hawking brilliant. Well, then you get Reg Barkley, who, I mean, he's portrayed as a smart guy who has almost no social skills. So that kind of humors him. And that's why
it really does. Yeah.
They bring him back in, I think, 3 different series.
Oh yeah. He's great. He's one of my favorite characters because he's so relatable. Again, he is brilliant, and he shows that at many times. He got Voyager home. Gosh darn it. He got Voyager home. He recognized there was a problem with the transporter, like all this kind of stuff. Like he's a smart guy, but he's got this. And again, you will get people like this in the workplace. Will get people who socially, I mean, heck, it could be you. Socially, you just can't connect with this person for whatever reason. Like I've met some people where it's like, yeah, I get along with people and they get along with people, but for some reason we can't. There's no animosity. It just we don't connect together for whatever reason. And
but this brings me back to Lower Decks again, in humanizing characters. These are people who are, so there's the bartender. Well, he's pretty affable. There's the guy bucking for promotion.
The Vulcan.
He's a smart guy. But he keeps pointing out that he can't seem to do anything right in Riker's eyes. Then there's the Bajoran woman who is trying to live down this death from her past. There's the nurse who thinks that her boyfriend is cheating on her, but it turns out that he's not. And then there's the Vulcan, who is purportedly the genius, but because he's so Vulcan, he's lived a sheltered Vulcan life, he can't connect with Geordi, even though he's just as good an engineer and he thinks of things that even the chief engineer hasn't thought of. But because he doesn't have the social skills, he can't relate. But you can relate to him because he's not perfect. And none of those characters are perfect. They each have a very large weakness that is explored in that episode.
Imperfection makes a good character. And again, it's to something like Star Trek, where the writing is so solid so much of the time that it can take minor characters or characters who are one-shots or characters like Wesley, who are seen as too perfect, and be able to explore all that, be able to pull that all apart. And that really is where that lives.
That's the
Geordi and Data or going on an adventure, or Worf and some one-off are going on an adventure. I almost don't care as much about the situation they're in as just how they react to it. Just like throw Gul Dukat and Worf into a scene together, or Garrick and Bashir into a scene together, and it's just like, how are these guys gonna bounce off of each other? It's gonna be, and there's so many combinations you can do with that, because there's so many characters and they carry over from season to season to season. It's just like there's so much potential.
Another of my favorite episodes is when Data got a girlfriend. And it talks about how many trillions of calculations he can do per second, and that he has more like he has the strength of multiple men. Like, I mean, Worf is an amazing warrior, but he's got nothing on Data. And yet there's this part of Data. I mean, we all know from the very first episode that he's an android and he doesn't understand emotion, and that's what he is trying to discover. He's trying to become more human. And then this woman basically throws herself at him. Not in the first season. He has a thing with Tasha Yar. I think it's in the 5th season where one of the ensigns, and he starts a relationship with her, and it's not going to work. But they both try so earnestly. And then after an argument, she comes over. He's prepared dinner, and she says, "I'm not going to stay." It was. Basically, she's dumping him. It's an amicable breakup, basically because he can't be offended. It's not rammed into him. But there's this wonderful moment where she says bye. He leaves, and he blows out the candle. Or no, she leaves. He blows out the candle, and he's just sitting there with this empty dinner table all set. And Spot jumps up on his lap, and he goes, "Hi, Spot," and he's just left there all alone, just with his cat.
Yeah,
it's It's heartbreaking.
They do great stuff. Like even with your Vulcan characters and your robot characters, the emergency medical hologram in Voyager had a family at one point.
Obviously, Robert Picardo and Jerry Ryan had quite the chemistry. Anything they were in together worked really well.
Yeah,
but their characters were just not meant to be. And the drama, like the conflict there, they can't be together. That's the conflict that makes good drama.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like it's and they get that. They get that characters playing off of each other might not always be simpatico, and that kind of friction is great. There was a time in TNG where Data took over command of the ship, and Worf was kind of grumbling about all of his decisions, and then Data took him aside, and he's like, Mr. Worf, when you're doing that, you're undermining me. And then Worf was like, you have to realize I'm the captain now. And then as he walks away, he's like, Mr. Worf, I hope this doesn't affect our friendship. He's just like, no, I have always considered you a good friend. And it's so stoic and so stilted, but it's perfect that this is the kind of friendship these characters would have. They're so formal together, but that is, for them, that's what friendship looks like. And it's funny and it's touching, and you're showing interpersonal conflict in a work environment, albeit very different than ones we are used to, but I mean, still, it's all there, and it all comes down to that, exploring the character. It's not about exploring the universe, Jim. It's about exploring the characters, because they're what's really interesting.
Not about the characters exploring the universe. It's about the characters exploring the characters in the universe. That's how I want to put it. Sure. And you're right. That's why you've got 20, 24, 26 episodes to explore that. You can explore multiple characters. Whereas, as I've said in the past, I really like Star Trek Picard, but I can barely catch my breath. Even though it wasn't dropped all at once, it was spaced out once a week for 10 weeks. It's like I could barely keep my breath because it was like a 10-hour-long action movie. Yeah,
it's way more about plot than it is dissecting these characters.
The whole series is based on fan service. They only made the series to cash in on fans who loved the show 25 years ago. So I understand what you're saying, and I think got to get over that, because the whole series was series.
I don't ever have to get over shitty writing. No, fuck that. Write better. TNG wrote better. It was 20 years ago.
But if you're going to say it's shitty writing, then you have to admit that the entire premise of the show, creating this Star Trek show starring Picard, is a shitty premise.
Yeah, probably. I mean, the person...
It was fun. I'll give you, it's not as well written as especially the end of TNG. The last couple of seasons were some of the best television ever made, I think. And honestly, the Picard, I enjoyed it. It's kind of, they were trying to make a fusion of the Next Generation, its movies, and Star Trek 2009, which I know you don't like. And honestly, the spiritual successor for the Next Generation, I think, is Seth MacFarlane's show, The Orville. Even though it's comedy, it really feels like the Next Generation.
It really does. It took a while to get going, but it hits a lot of those hallmarks. What we're talking about in terms of characters and character relationships, they explore a lot with these characters, like a lot. And this is like the comedy star. What I like about it is, in the beginning, it was very much kind of Seth MacFarlane kind of comedy kind of thing. At a certain point, they almost put that to the side. Like, there'd be a couple jokes an episode, but sometimes we were just dealing with crap. We were just dealing with, I'm in love with a robot. That's the episode. No, but I'm really in love with a robot. How do we deal with that? And it took a really just not stupid comedy. It took a really just, no, imagine you're a human being dealing with this kind of straightforward approach. Yeah. And that's what makes it great.
Put somebody in a ridiculous situation and laugh about it because it's ridiculous, and then deal with it. I'm in love with a robot. And then it turns out it's a genocidal robot.
No, but that's the thing too. Like that whole arc was almost kind of like DS9. Like all of a sudden we're at war with the Kalon, and we're allying with the whatever Bortus's race. I can't remember. Mocklin. We're like allying with the Mocklin, and there's tensions there because we have ethical differences, but we have to ally together to beat the Kalon, and that was like classic DS9. Like that was great. Like they're dealing on all these things, and they're playing it straight. Like, and they had a big dumb like space battle too, but that wasn't the focus of the episode. The focus of the episode is we've lost Isaac. We got to get him back. This is our friend, and he's been brainwashed by these crazy robots. That was the thrust of the episode, not the battle. And that was that was the same thing in the very best Star Trek is.
That's why it feels like Star Trek. Whereas the Star Trek movies, as I enjoy them as movies, I've enjoyed every single one of them, honestly, as a movie. But the thing is, it's a couple of hours of action and special effects, and that's not really what Star Trek is about.
Yeah.
So, if I want action and lack of character development and things going boom, I'll watch Star Wars.
You'll watch a new Star Wars because that's the thing. Even Star Wars,
because as you said, Solo is just all brown and nothing.
Yeah, Solo's brown and nothing.
I'll watch old Star Wars. Thank you very much.
But that's the thing. Even old Star Wars, where you have these very broad character archetypes, right? They still put them through crap. Right? It's still about the reason why we care about this is I don't care about the war, about the rebellion against the Empire or the resistance or anything. I don't care about that. But I care about these characters. So seeing Luke just alone in a swamp with a Muppet training and learning, that's all he's doing the whole time. He spends that whole movie pretty much out of the action, just learning stuff. And when he does get into the action, he gets his ass handed to him because he doesn't know enough yet. Like, it's all about that. It's all about exploring the character. Even in this dumb action, like even in this broad strokes action franchise, it still all comes down to the character. And that's one of the reasons of Return of the Jedi. A lot of people dismiss it. It's very split, the fan base, actually. Half of the people I find are like, oh, this is garbage. Half of the people love it. It's their favorite movie. It's my favorite Star Wars movie because at the end of the day, it's about Darth Vader's redemption. And that's the interesting thing. I like the battle on Endor. It's fun. It's a lot of fun. A lot of good action stuff is happening there. It's fun. It's comedic. It's light. It's serious. But at the end of the day, it's about this interpersonal conflict. Can I save my dad? And that's something everybody can relate to some extent.
And I'll point out it's an interesting bond that's created there.
Yeah.
Darth Vader has been this looming, he's the hammer of the Emperor for 20 years. He's this looming specter that everybody is scared of, maybe even more so than the Emperor, because people don't know how powerful the Emperor is. They know that Darth Vader will come and kill you, though. And Luke, at the end, in the climax of Return of the Jedi, he's willing to sacrifice himself for Darth Vader. And then Darth Vader does sacrifice himself for Luke.
Yeah.
And so there's that bond created there. And I would argue that Data and Picard have that.
No. no, I would.
No,
with Luke, it's almost more like a mental block. It's almost more like at first he hates Darth Vader, and then, oh, I'm your father. It's like, well, I can't kill you if it's like I can't kill you if you're my father. It becomes this block for him, and then he's like, ethically, he's like, I can't do this, and everybody's telling him, all the old Jedi masters are telling him, if you don't do this, we lose. The only way he wins in that movie is by losing. He gets his ass handed to him at the end. He gets electrocuted by the Emperor, and that's the only way he wins. So even in Star Wars, which is an action franchise at its core, it still, at its best, comes down to the characters. Luke wins by not fighting in the end. That's powerful.
I think you just made the ultimate argument for why Luke Skywalker is the most powerful of the Jedi. Because all of these historical masters are saying, you have to destroy Vader or we lose. And then he says, no, I give up everything. I surrender to him.
He finds his own path. It's more like
that's why he saw a better way instead of the constant they beat us, then we beat them, then they beat us, and we beat them. saw through it. He saw past it.
Yeah. And it's if the New Hope is about him discovering this path, the path of the Jedi, and Empire is about him learning more and basically falling from that path. He basically loses everything by the end of that movie, more than he could ever imagine by straying from the path. That final movie is about him forging his own path. That's one of the most compelling things a character can do. And it's so compelling that they repeated that exact same plot point for, I won't get into spoilers too much, for Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is one of the greatest epic cartoons ever made. It borrows things from Lord of the Rings. It borrows things from it borrows things from Star Wars, all this, Pokemon even. It's borrowing all of this stuff, and it's done in like kind of a mythologized, Asianized world. It's really interesting. But basically that whole end, he doesn't have any connection. The hero in that doesn't have any connection with the big bad guy. The big bad guy is just the big bad guy at the end. But he's like, no, I can't do this. Like he's a vegetarian monk. He's a vegetarian monk. And he's like, I can't do this. I can't kill this guy. So he finds another way. Like, and it's such a powerful idea that even years later, it's being used again. And again, it comes down to character choice, character action, exploring what they're going through. Like that.
And this is how I see Data. I think he has that. He makes his own conscience. He achieves sentience, I think, in his final moments. Because when we meet him, he doesn't understand humans. He doesn't understand emotion. He doesn't have emotion. He's almost comic relief. He's quite comic.
Yeah, he's funny because he doesn't get the joke.
And he doesn't understand what humanity is. But in the moment right before he dies, he realizes and makes a conscious decision that Picard's life is more important than his. He's willing to sacrifice himself, and he does. And he achieves humanity at that moment, I think. And that was his path to choose.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think he's so revered by Picard 30 years later. Not because this man sacrificed himself for me, but because it was for me. It wasn't because he is self-sacrificing. It's because that's how much he cared about me.
The way you put it is better than it was ever put in Picard. They don't have writing as good as the thing you just said off the top of your head right now. And
well, give them my number then, because they're doing
second.
I'll be there.
Yeah, I mean, sure, you'll be there. Emergency medical actors will need emergency actor holograms for season 2 because of the coronavirus. And I will say this to the credit of the people trying to guess what the fans want. The only characters I really cared about were characters from the past coming back. The new ones I didn't find that interesting. I like seeing Picard. I like seeing Deanna and Will again. The snippets we saw of Data, Jerry Ryan, of course, even Ichab. It was cool. It's like, oh yeah, it's Ichab. He's back.
Yeah, that gut punch.
Yeah, yeah, but I cared about that because that relationship was really well built and really well.
Because they built it over 7 years. Well, not 7 years, but
it was a couple seasons in Voyager. Yeah, but I mean, it's like I had the feels there, whereas all the other characters, I was like, I don't care about Raffi. I don't care about Agnes Girardi. I don't really care about Rios.
We're like
Dodge or Vaj or no, what's her name? Dodge.
That's like a toddler at the babysitter. The toddler is enthralled with the babysitter, but when mommy and daddy show up, the babysitter doesn't exist anymore. And that's what the new characters were like. It's like when Will and Deanna show up, all our eyes are just glued there.
Yeah, because we these people. We've grown with them. And because
we've seen them for a long time. And yeah. I'll say I can buy into what they were trying to do, because you pointed out to me in the past that it's not always about what you write. It's about what you don't write. It's about what's implied. But I mean, it's possible that you don't write it well enough to get everybody on board. And, that's fine. And I'll give you, it's not as well written as The Next Generation.
Yeah.
But I did enjoy it. except for the last half of the last episode.
Now,
Just like how you get.
would you say that Picard is as well written as because this is the interesting thing, like you could say nostalgia goggles, but we have a contemporary example of TNG happening simultaneously to Discovery and Picard. So would you say that Picard is as well written as the Orville?
That's tough, because honestly they're pretty different. The Orville is much more like the original Star Trek or The Next Generation, and Picard is more like the movies they've done, or Discovery, or it's much more action and suspense based. I'll say that the Orville really is Star Trek.
Yeah.
And Picard is more like a Star Trek movie than anything. It's more based in special effects and action. And so I'd have to say, for what I want Star Trek to be, the Orville is probably better written. That's not to say that I didn't like Picard. I do like Picard. I even like Discovery, although its writing is, there's no comparison. The other two deserve their accolades much better.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Orville is better written. I will continue to follow Picard because I grew up with Captain Picard, and I enjoy the character. I enjoy the nostalgia. But for new ideas or new putting your characters that you're developing into new situations and exploring that, I get that from the Orville, and I get that from the Expanse.
Yeah.
But that's not really that present in Picard, or especially Discovery.
If they tell me season 2 of Picard, like if Picard season 1 was just to kind of get people interested in the character again, and they made this 10-hour movie, and they're like, okay, now Robo Picard is going to go on some adventures, and he's going to get in his ship, and he's just going to fly around the universe, and he's going to have ethical dilemmas, and he's going to get a crew of interesting people, I'd be like, yeah, I'm back on board. But if they continue with the same kind of, oh, the Zhat Vash have discovered a new threat, and it's the Klingons this time, and we have to defeat the Klingons, I'll be like, no, I'm okay.
I can guarantee you that it'll be 1 or 2 issues for the entire season that he has to tackle. It won't be 10 ethical dilemmas over 10 episodes. It'll be, here's your ethical dilemma and your secondary dilemma for the season, and he'll tackle them for the season, because honestly, that's the way television works these days.
Yeah. I don't know. But I don't know, there still is serialized stuff. Like you even have Star Trek right now. Like what their Lower Decks looks like it's trying to be is, quite frankly, it looks like Rick and Morty, which is a serialized sci-fi show. There's some overarching elements, but it's pretty much, what adventure are we going to go on today in time and space? Basically, it's kind of not so much time, dimension hopping, but basically it's Doctor Who without the ethics. Is what it is. It's an 8-year-old Doctor Who is discovering different dimensions. That's basically what it is. And they're all self-contained.
I know nothing about this show that's in development. That's a great description of Doctor Who, though. It's just like blank slate because the next episode, he's in a different space and a different time. And we get to see his adventure of the week and what he did, or she, actually. Now it's she. And contrary to what a lot of my friends have said, I really like the female Doctor. I think it's about time that we had a female Doctor, and we have a female Master. That happened a few years ago.
Yeah, she was good. I liked Missy.
The other show that I think does it well is The Mandalorian.
Yeah.
It might seem like the overarching plot is, what is he going to do with Baby Yoda? But honestly, it's just he's just living his life. He's just trying to do work, trying to get paid, and he has a bit of a conscience. if he really was a mercenary, he would have left Baby Yoda behind.
Yeah, his conscience
he's
makes
gotta be-
sense too, because he was abandoned as a child and all this stuff. That's the interesting thing. Mandalorian is almost the antithesis to Star Trek. It almost goes in the opposite direction so far that it completely works. It's you have
Antithesis Star Wars, you mean?
it's
very much like Star Trek. It's his adventure of the week.
yeah,
What's
it
he gonna
is.
do next?
It is, and that's it. But I mean, it's like it's not really about. There are long stretches where there's no talking at all. You know, you don't know a lot about this character. It is still about the character. It is still about the Mandalorian. There are still great characters in it, but again, they're very broad. You have the Nick Nolte, the I have spoken guy. It's kind of you get him very quickly, and he's very likable very quickly. The same with Gina Carano. Am I saying that right? Gina
Yeah.
Carano. Yeah. Like you get her very quickly too. There's not a lot to really unpack, but they're archetypes. They're relatable immediately. They go on adventures, and it's well done. It's well done action. It's well done plotting. They're singular adventures. One of the most intimidating things is a single AT-AT or ATST.
He faces off against a walker.
He won. He faces off against one of them, and it's terrifying. It appears it's got red glowing eyes. You're just waiting for this thing to step on their trap, and it's blowing the crap out of everything. Just one of them is terrifying. It's so well written. It's so well done.
It's nicely done that way, but it's all in the perspective of when you see it. These guys are on foot. They're infantry facing a tank.
Yeah, and they got like sticks. It's great.
An 80-ton tank. I had somebody who worked in the military in Israel explain this to me.
Mm-hmm.
He worked on a tank base, and it's just 80 tons, which is a lot, but it's not a 200-ton jumbo jet. The thing is, when a tank drives by, it's not like it's rattling the windows. It shakes the entire world. It's like an earthquake is going on. And that's what these guys would be facing when, you've got a laser rifle and a walker is coming.
Now, I want to compare that to, talking about threat, The Last Skywalker, The Rise of Skywalker, where Emperor Palpatine snaps his fingers and basically summons 1,000,000 Death Stars, all with the capability to destroy a planet. Did you feel any sense of threat there? Because I didn't feel the slightest one. If he can just snap his fingers and there's 1,000,000 tanks, that's somehow way less terrifying than this one lone chicken walker in the woods. And it's all in how it's presented. Again, cared about those characters, even though we had just met them. Mandalorian, maybe he's going to settle down with this cute girl, and all the kids are running around playing with Baby Yoda, and they're farming the fish, and raiders are coming in and stealing their fish. And there's enough there, even though it's very broad. There's enough there that I actually care about the characters in this episode. Whereas in the last thingy, you got Miss Perfect running around with her sword there, and I forgot what to do with Finn's character, and who even cares. Rose is shoved off to the side, gets a pat on the head, goodbye. Like, you don't even care about these characters anymore.
Right. It's all in how it's presented. In A New Hope, we're in the Millennium Falcon, when they see a moon, it's not a moon, it's the Death Star, and it's gonna kill them.
It hasn't done anything yet. Well, it has done something. It blows a planet up, and we see the aftermath of that. But then it's just coming towards you, and you're just like, this is huge.
And you know that he's been working on it for years. And in Return of the Jedi, it takes years because it's not even finished.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, we're still going to put it into use, even though it's not finished.
Yeah.
And then when he can just conjure this enormous fleet of Star Destroyers out of nowhere that nobody has ever heard of, I can tell you, when the during World War II, the Japanese Navy and the U.S. Navy knew exactly what each other had, and it was just a matter of finding it, because the Pacific Ocean is enormous. You can't build a fleet of hundreds or thousands of not only regular ships but super weapon ships without anybody knowing about it.
Jim.
So it shouldn't be a matter of, we didn't know that you had 1,000 ships. It should be somebody's building all of these ships, and we just don't know where, and we don't know exactly who's doing it.
Jim, you're forgetting. They were buried in ice. And then the Emperor snapped his fingers, and then they come out of the ice fully manned with crews, who I guess were just living there, frozen in the ice.
and
I explain it perfectly.
Endor, freaking Endor, the jungle planet. The Emperor in Return of the Jedi, the Emperor actually said the forest moon of Endor. But in this new movie, it's an ocean planet. I'm like, did you not watch the
I don't even know if it's the same place. And like the throne room is still perfectly intact. Even though it got blown up, like it's perfectly intact. There are doors that are still working that still have electricity coming to them. She pushes the thing and the Wayfinder, whatever comes up, and it's still working.
Not only in the movie do they say that they're going to Endor, but we know that the Death Star blew up over Endor. So the pieces would have fallen onto Endor.
But it blew up. It blowed up. How is everything still perfectly intact? It doesn't make sense. Yeah, it's in such good condition. I hope I look that way when I'm 30 years old. I hope I'm in as good condition as the blowed up Death Star, because it's basically perfectly functional. It's like, oh, there's still glass in the windows, Jim. The glass didn't get blowed up. The glass didn't get blowed up, Jim. How does this happen?
And the Star Destroyers didn't get crushed by the iceberg.
The ice, nobody froze down there. They're perfectly fine. I love the line. Somehow the Emperor is back. And Rey's like, who? Who is this?
Also, they land on the Star Destroyers and ride cavalry along the Star Destroyers to destroy them. I'm like, but it's space. How do you ride a horse or whatever they were riding? It wasn't a horse, but it was close enough. How do you ride cavalry in space? What are you breathing? Like if they were if they had like masks, if they were in space suits. I mean,
if it was a low orbit.
Even the stormtroopers, even if they were in something like stormtroopers, I could believe it. But they weren't. They were just
maybe there's some kind of low-level force field just in case they had a cavalry battle on the surface. You know? They were expecting that, so they had a low-level oxygen field just around the surface, just big enough so that you and your horse can stand there and ride on there. And also there's gravity generators.
There's only so far I'm willing to suspend my disbelief. At least Star Trek, I'll point out in First Contact, when they have to go outside the ship and walk on the hull of the Enterprise, they're in spacesuits with magnetic boots, and Picard, to dodge the Borg zombie, he like turns off his magnets and he tries to fly over its head, and then Worf, to defeat them, he like unlatches the clamps and the thing floats away, and that big moment of assimilate this, and he blows the shit out of it. At least they're dealing with some semblance of real physics.
No, Star Trek has always been more concerned about the science than than Star Wars has. Sometimes to a detriment, and sometimes it makes the story more interesting. It's weird because I don't necessarily want no techno-babble in my Star Trek, but there are some techno-babble heavy episodes where I'm just kind of like, I don't care. Like, get back to the, like, you know what I mean? Like, sometimes it does get weighed down by that. It's weird, but I don't want none of it, because the nice thing about Star Trek is there is a semblance of scientific accuracy. Not all the time, obviously. You have to guess. We're dealing with the far future, of course, but you know, for the most part, it does ground the world a little bit. But at the same time, too much of that, it
does paint the fact that Star Trek is science fiction and Star Wars is fantasy.
Yeah, it's science. It's fantasy. Yeah. It's true, so, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's fine.
I mean, in Star Trek, they're astronauts. In Star Wars, they're space wizards.
Yeah, there's smugglers and rebels, and you know, it's
Oh, come on, they're space wizards. Jedi, come on, they choke from like 30 meters away, or make somebody fly into the air.
Like you're using psychokinetics, whatever. I mean, you have people who get
It's Lord of the Rings in face.
You have empaths in Star Trek. You have people who can change their consciousness from one to another through a slug. You know, you have all this wacky stuff. It just Star Trek takes more time to try and explain it. That's really the difference. In Star Wars, it's just like, yeah, you can heal people now. It's just okay, sure. And for the most part, it's fine. But like it's occasionally it's too like. Here's the thing: I'm not against
as long as they're not lazy with the writing. Like
exactly.
Picard and all of Star Wars 7, 8, and 9.
Yeah. It's I mean, that's the thing. Like, I'm not one of these people who's like, oh, the Jedi can only do things we've ever seen Jedi do before. Because how do you grow? How do you evolve? Yeah, you can astral project yourself. Sure, you can force heal someone. Sure, I'm fine with that. But it's all in how you present it. It's the devil's in the details, as they say. You have new force powers.
Absolutely right. Attention to detail. And I had a relationship with the crew of the Enterprise D for 7 years as I went through junior high and high school. And it was formative years for me. So I'll always be, that's why when we chose our crew, Captain Picard was my captain.
You know, it's interesting because we come from it from very different perspectives. I think I first got into Star Trek, really, I think it was like 2012. I remember back in animation school, I got into it. And like a lot of the feelings you talk about and a lot of the characters you gravitate to, I started with DS9 as well. I watched, I think, the pilot of like all of them. And then I was like, you know what? Quark is an interesting character. I want to see what happens to Quark. So I went with DS9 first. I kind of jumped around, and then I went to TNG, and then I went to Voyager and like all this kind of stuff. But it still holds up, even though I didn't grow up with this as a kid. Like I still really gravitate towards it. And again, it's the strength of these characters. It's the strength of the writing. It's the strength of these ideas. They really hold up. They really do. And that's the thing I can say without nostalgia goggles, because I didn't have that nostalgia. It's not
with society, changes in society, it is held up. I was having a similar discussion with some other people just a few days ago. And like one of the guys was a big Sex and the City fan. He actually, we had made a pair of fan films, the role reversal, where it's instead of 4 main women, it was 4 main guys, and they were all in university. And he said, I went back and watched some of the episodes of Sex and the City, and it's just, you don't behave that way these days. And all sorts of other, like Frasier and Seinfeld and Cheers, they just, like, you don't behave that way anymore. But if you look back at The Next Generation, yeah, it still holds up. I'll still watch every episode.
I mean, I do think a lot of what you talked about, there are moments of those. I haven't seen Sex and the City, but obviously like Frasier and Cheers, I've seen some of that, and some of that does hold up. There are some nice moments in some of those,
of course.
But it's some stuff really doesn't though. Like that's the thing, and you can't necessarily expect it to. Like I mean, no. Star Trek has the advantage of it's trying to be moral. It's trying to be ethical. So it's usually a little ahead of the curve. We talked about this, how, you know, they had the first interracial kiss and they had a prominent lesbian kiss and things like that, and showing those relationships and ahead of the curve because they're trying to be better. Whereas, you know, you go back and watch Friends, and I think there's still a lot of good stuff to like about Friends. It was a popular show for a reason. It's popular now more than ever on streaming. But I mean, the gay panic, it's just like, oh, these characters are behaving weird. Like you don't act like this anymore. You know, like this is like it's not even on a level where it's like, oh, like I find this funny. It's like, was this ever funny? Like it's like that kind of a thing. It's like I can understand if somebody's going for a joke and it doesn't age well, but sometimes you're just like, would I have even laughed at this in the day? And you know, like
we recently encountered that with Shakespeare, right? I mean, I really enjoyed Taming of the Shrew.
I did too.
But some of the stuff was like, holy shit! He's basically he's a wife abuser, is what he is.
He is. He very much is.
You know,
You have to address that. Either you have to present it in a different way when you stage it today, or you have to address the fact that no, this is your bad guy. Now, by today's standards, this is your bad guy.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like none of these properties are like bad or evil because they did this. Like, we grow and we learn and our standards change and all of this stuff. It doesn't necessarily excuse it, but you do kind of have to look through it in a different light. But again, because Star Trek has the advantage, and something like Doctor Who as well, they were always socially conscious, like has the advantage of, because we're trying to be better, because we're always checking ourselves and we're trying to and they don't always get it right. Of course, they don't always get it right. They're not perfect, but because they're trying to be better, they present something that holds up in terms of the ethics, in terms of the morality. But honestly, it's the writing is just good. The characters are just good. They're well done. And again, like TNG, it took 2 seasons or like 1.5 seasons before it got really good. It was still Gene Roddenberry had a lot of weird ideas in the beginning. We talk about one of the best things about Star Trek being its characters and their interpersonal relations. Well, when TNG came out, his idea for the future was, people don't have interpersonal conflicts anymore. That's just not a thing that happens in the future. We've evolved beyond that. And the writers were just like, Gene, that doesn't
make for great drama.
That does not make for great drama, Gene. Yeah. You gotta change that. So it's interesting. The thing he was trying to get rid of is the thing I would say that has made Star Trek stand the test of time, is that we love these characters.
The first Star Trek property that wasn't fully in Gene Roddenberry's control was Deep Space Nine, because he died right before he died, 3 or 4 seasons into the Next Generation. Yeah. So Deep Space Nine didn't come from his brain. Yeah. And I mean, they dealt with an overarching war for 4 or 5 years. Yeah. But then they came back with Voyager. They came back to going out into space to explore, adventure of the week. And yet they had built-in conflict. The captain and the first officer were from opposite sides of conflict. Yeah. And even though they very quickly grew to respect each other, they were at odds they had major differences of opinion over a lot of things.
When they were fighting I think it was the Krenim, I think her and Chakotay, they were complete. Like, she demoted Chakotay at one point. It was basically, get off my bridge. You don't agree with me. Which is interesting for your hero captain to do. That's kind of not the thing. I think the episode resolves by they get through the conflict and they're like, I respect you and everything, but I would have made that same decision again. And they kind of understood each other, even though they were on completely opposite sides.
Well, when they first encountered the Borg, she wanted to we can't go around the Borg. We have to go through their space, and it'll take a year. And so we have to have some sort of relationship with them. She wanted to make allies out of them. And he said, I will carry out your orders, but you're wrong. And then she said, well, then I really am alone, aren't I? And of course it ended up working out, but not before some people got killed and some stuff got blowed up.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing too. They don't always make the same. I think there's a great episode, maybe it's not a great episode, but there's a lovely little moment. There's an episode in TNG where Deanna is trying for her qualification to become, I don't know, so she could like fly the ship.
She's going to be a bridge officer. She's going to be a commander.
Yeah, she's going up a rank or something. And there's this idea that to get through the scenario, she has to sacrifice one of the lives of one of her crew members. And the point of this exercise is, to be a commander, you have to be able to make those big kind of decisions. And that's kind of the learning moment is, you're doing stuff that's not great all the time, but sometimes you're doing what you have to do, or you're doing in what you believe is right. And Star Trek is able to address that its characters have failings. Its characters do things like there's another episode of DS9 where Worf blows up a ship, and it turns out that there was nobody on the ship, or that the ship should have been blown up, but he didn't know that at the time. And that's kind of one of the things he's called out on. It's it was either my crew or this crew. And, the ethics of the Federation are, the needs of the many. You should have sacrificed your ship if you didn't know. You should have taken that risk, because everybody on this ship knows what the stakes are. They know that their life is forfeit for the greater good if it comes to that. And that's
because they thought it was a civilian ship disguised and purposely brought into a war zone, and he shoots it.
Yeah.
And Cisco goes to bat for him. But I love that at the end where I love the fact that he goes to bat for him, defends him for everything that he's got, because it turns out that they were framing him, and it was an empty ship, and it was a war zone. So I was on Worf's side saying, you don't know what that ship is going to do. It's a war zone. Shoot it. But then at the end, Cisco just berates him at the end. It's like, I shouldn't have shot at that ship. You're damn right you shouldn't have shot at that.
Yeah.
We're Starfleet. We never put civilians in harm's way, even if it means our own lives.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing is, like, you can come out of that scenario agreeing with either, you know, and there's not necessarily like, it shows, no, like in some measure, Worf acted completely legitimately. This is your crew and you protect your own. But at the other end, no, like, we're looking at the bigger picture as Starfleet. We're looking at civilian life as well. So it's like that is the strength of it. Like, you can see these characters are flawed or not making the right action all the time, or sometimes it's just not clear cut what the right action is, but they still have to act and they still have to make choices and they still have to live with those consequences. That's the compelling thing about it.
The genderless society that they come across, and Riker falls in love with one of them, and it's the whole thing is a parable for being gay. You know, we're not broken. We love the way that you love. We're not broken just because we don't love the same people as you.
I think the power of it is more than that. Like, when I first saw it, I thought it was about transgender rights. Really, on rewatching it, I think what it's about is conformity. Here's a person who doesn't conform to the needs of the society. I think that's why Star Trek works. It's so broad in a lot of these things. Like, you know, sometimes you do get, you know, the Ferengi are supposed to be stand-ins for capitalism and things like that. But I mean, the Cardassians aren't supposed to be Hitler. They're just supposed to be general fascist state first society. You know, there aren't necessarily these one-to-one parables you can read it into, and I would rather see something where I can kind of read into my own meaning than the writer telling me, no, we're talking about Trump era politics here. Well, why can't it just be about outcasts, and I can kind of see these parallels in my own society? That's what intelligent writing does. It doesn't
not a direct relation to reality. It is telling a story, a moral story, a morality story. The best example in Star Trek, I think, is from the original series, where they meet the race that's colored right down the center of their face, and it's black. Oh, we're black on the right, they're black on the left. Yeah. I mean, it's obviously about racism, but it's pretty ridiculous and arbitrary terms, which really, racism is exactly that. Ridiculous, arbitrary terms.
Yeah.
You know, like, that's your skin is dark. Well, I hate you. Oh, you got different shaped eyes than me. Well, I hate you. Yeah. It's ridiculous and arbitrary.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, those creatures are obviously serving as a parallel. You don't necessarily need to see this as, I mean, that would have been happening during the civil rights era and stuff like that. But I mean, we have politics now that are very similar. I would say it's a second civil age that we're looking at right now, and that's still applicable. But it's you know, it's broad enough that you can put in your interpretations. But when you're, I mean, again, they did do some things where, I mean, the Romulans are obviously very much inspired by Cold War era politics. At the same time, you have Pavel Chekhov on the bridge, would have been a citizen of the USSR. You know what I mean? Like, and here we're saying, no, this is the future. We're all getting along now. So it's inspiration should not be the be all end all of the parable, what you're trying to say. Creating a one-to-one kind of thing, and that's the thing. Like,
no, but that's why it's a parable. It's not one-to-one. It's open to interpretation.
Yeah, I mean,
so a direct correlation to present day society is not necessarily what they should be trying to accomplish. They should be
because
trying
it's not going to last, right? Like when the politics
Yes.
of today have, like, when he's going to be out of office at some point, and then we're going to be dealing with someone else. So
Exactly.
when that goes, like, that's going to be dated. Like, I don't know if you ever go back and you watch anything old and they're talking about Bush era politics and things like that. Even if I agree with your message politically, it does stink of being dated. It really does.
Well,
and I think
exactly.
and
there's a reason why we go back and watch the Next Generation episodes or the original series.
Yeah.
How often do we go back and watch Saturday Night Live episodes? We don't, because it had to do with satirizing the politics and culture of the time. And I wasn't alive in 1975 when Saturday Night Live started. Yeah. I wasn't alive when the Star Trek started in the 60s.
Yeah.
But I'll watch the episodes because, oh hey, they've got a message, and it's not about it's about what was going on at the time.
Yeah.
But it's not clothed in the society of the time. Shakespeare does the same thing. He's talking about the society he was in, but he was using other things to do it. And that's why it can be reinterpreted to mean something personal to the viewer of the day.
Yeah, and that's the power. Like, things like that will last because they're brought. Like, there's a reason we still talk about, Romeo and Juliet, because we've all experienced young love, and we know that the idea of feuding and vengeance and inbred hatred, that doesn't go away. I mean, it's specific to its time. It's drawing on that, but I mean, the ending lines of the play, all are punished. It makes it broadly applicable, and that's why things like that last, because you can use specifics to inform the world you create, but in order for it to have staying power, it has to have broader implications.
Yeah, and who hasn't watched Wesley Crusher on trial?
Yeah.
And identified with him, because it was a parable for he wants to get out of the shadow of his parents, his parental figures, and forge his own path. And who doesn't identify with that?
Yeah, or trying to be the best, or the idea of your perfection and any perceived chink in it,
or live up to expectations.
Detrimental. Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, my one complaint about the episode is he doesn't.
Still be referent. That episode is 30 years old, and it will still be relevant in another 30 years.
Yeah, I mean, like, as you say, it kind of redeems the character of Wesley Crusher by making him imperfect. That's the beauty of it. It turns his perfection against him. It's really smartly done. It's really well written. It created the template, of course, for Tom Paris. Basically would have been the same guy, but he came back, so they didn't.
It was the same actor.
Same actor. It was supposed to be the exact same character, but they didn't want to pay that right of royalties, so they brought him back. Okay, same backstory. We're gonna change your name. You're Tom Paris now. Okay, cool.
Yeah, there was also baggage that they would have had to deal with.
Yeah, true.
And they wanted to create their own thing.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that they created Tom Paris, who had the flavor of Josh Locarno, and of course the look, and he did a good job. And I think that character had one of the best story arcs of Voyager, because he came out of prison. He was released from prison because they needed his skills to get this one mission done, and then they were going to cut him loose. But then he's trapped on this ship on the other side of the universe, and over 7 years, and he was dreading seeing his father again because his father saw him as such a letdown. But he had become a lieutenant. He had become a well-respected pilot and a well-respected officer of Voyager, integral to the crew. Yeah. He had gotten married. He was having a kid, and he was afraid of meeting up with his father because his father had always seen him as a failure. And he was a criminal at the beginning of the show.
Yeah.
But at the end, he's an upstanding officer and a gentleman.
Who do you think had the best? You might have already said it. I don't know. Who do you think had the best character arc in Star Trek?
In any of them, or just Voyager?
Any of them. I think you've said for Voyager.
Well, the Doctor was pretty good though too, because he was just an appendage. He was at the beginning is an appendage. He's a tool, and at the end he was a person.
Yeah.
And I think that had something to do with the introduction of Seven of Nine, and both of those actors being wonderful performers.
Yeah.
But I think Tom Paris had one of the most interesting character arcs. Almost as powerful as Data, and Data's character arc going to Nemesis, where at Farpoint he's a robot. Yeah. Yes, he's an android. Yes, he's sentient, but he's a robot at the beginning.
Yeah.
And then at the end, I think he achieves humanity. That he makes the decision to sacrifice himself for Picard, because he understands. Like, I mean, humans do that all the time. For a parent, for a loved one, for a child. Their history is replete with instances of people sacrificing themselves for the good of another. And Data would not be programmed with that. Yes, he's programmed to defend people, and to defend himself, defend people, but to sacrifice yourself because you think you care about somebody so much that you think it's more important that they live on. And that is a powerful, his story arc is a powerful story arc, because he's a robot at the beginning, he's human at the end.
Yeah, I for Data, I kind of see there's a lot of like he has a lot of little moments, right? He has to defend his humanity in Measure of a Man, and then in Lull, he's experiencing parenthood, and then he experiences romance. It's, for me, it's not one definitive. Oh, I can really see the journey you've been on. Like I could see him, like, maybe in earlier seasons even sacrificing himself. It's a very Starfleet thing, everybody else before me to do. You get that a lot from Mr. Spock, of course, and that kind of bleeds into the rest of Star Trek. It's one of the most memorable quotes, and for me, that is Starfleet, or at least kind of my idea of Starfleet. It's the needs of the many versus the needs of the few. But so, like, he definitely grows, but I don't really see, like, oh, you're clearly this. It's more gradual. You could argue more realistic, because people generally, they don't have major leaps and bounds, turning points. We change a little, we develop a little as
He's very gradual. It's great.
Someone for me who's yeah, no, it's very interesting. Like, he's a good character. He's a very good character. Don't get me wrong. He's your Spock, robot, android, non-human, experiencing humanity kind of character for that series, and it really works, as many of them do.
He is humanity throughout the show, and throughout the movies, but you still realize that he is an android. So that's his struggle. It's almost a tragic struggle, because we know he can never attain humanity, and yet he still strives for it. And yet I would say that when he sacrifices himself for Picard, he really is human.
Okay, sure.
I think he actually achieves humanity there, and of course it's a metaphor or an allegory. I don't know what the best term for it is. Of course, I know he doesn't transubstantiate and become something else like in Star Wars. But I know he's still an android, but he's fully.
There's kind of this is the reason a lot of people don't like Nemesis. I like it fine. And one of the reasons is, of course, Data, and it's not Lore who's the Data clone they find in the sand. It's someone else. But B4, yeah, it's the remnant of that memory. Like, at the end, he's singing the same song that Data was singing. He's got all the memories and things like that, and that's a nice little, like. He's still with us. He still exists in some point. It's very nice. It's very poetic. For me, I would say my favorite story arc has got to be Odo, because he starts off in episode 1. I don't know who I am. I need to find out who I am. Turns out who I am is a bunch of genocidal monsters, and he ends not only going back to them, but going back to them because he's the only one who can save them, and he does that by changing their mind. Very, very Star Trek. It's lovely. I love it.
And he gives up. He sacrifices himself to do it, because
he does. He
gives up what he wants. He spent years trying to achieve to have what solids have, and he finally gets that, and then he gives it up to go back to his people and save them.
The thing I love about Odo too is, unlike Data, who he wants to be human. You know, episode 1, Riker's like, "Oh, you're Pinocchio. You want to be a real boy," which he brings back in Nemesis as well at the end. Odo never really wants to be human. He's kind of happy with who he is at the beginning, but then he learns more, and he's able to love, and he's able to have friends, because he's a lot about him is very fits that kind of robot mold as well. You know, he doesn't really need to sleep. He regenerates once every 16 hours. He's super strong. He can look like anybody. He's very military and very officious and very kind of in his box. And this is my job, and I'm just gonna kind of do it. And he doesn't really have any drive to change, but he does change by the things that happen to him. The more he discovers, the more he grows, which is kind of nice and organic as well. You don't necessarily want to be like, I want to be a different person, but then, you know, 7 years go by, you live through a war, you fall in love with a girl, you find out where you come from. You know, it's things will happen. You'll be different, and he's very different by the end of it. And I love that character just as a through line for the whole series. You can say the series is about Cisco being the emissary and going from, you know, being skeptical of it and not liking it to kind of growing into the role and then becoming the emissary by the end of it. But for me, it's
and
really
becoming
about
Bajoran to some extent, because he ends up living with the prophets. He wants to. There's a great scene where he talks about he's talking to the admiral during the war, and he's like, you know, this was just a mission for me at the beginning, but now I see it's home. After the war, I want to retire, and it'll be I want to have a cabin on Bajor.
Yeah, I remember that. That's nice.
And it's a wonderful scene. It's like, I'll always be I'm a Starfleet officer. I'll go where I'm needed. But when I come home, it'll be to Bajor.
Yeah, which is interesting because he has strong family roots in New Orleans, right? His dad's got the restaurant there, and of course,
and
he
an
had a family
interesting
there.
contrast to Ro Laren, who was the first Bajoran we saw, and she wants nothing to do with her people when we meet her. She's like, they're weak people. She actually says to Picard, they're a weak, broken people, and they're looking at the refugee camp. They're weak. They're broken. I will never be that. And then, you know, she has an interesting story arc because she comes around not to fight with, it's not her people because they achieved their independence in Deep Space Nine.
But the Maquis.
But she fights with the Maquis because they're fighting her fight, her people's fight.
She finds a new cause, and that's where her energy gets channeled. And again,
I would say she's got one of the best story arcs, even though she was a main character, a main cast member in the 5th season. But if you look, she's in a total of like 20 episodes spread over 4 years.
It's not a lot. It's not a lot of episodes. Yeah,
but she made a huge impact. Maybe because she's well written, but also maybe because Michelle Forbes. Michelle Forbes is a wonderful actress. So and we see that time and again with, you know, I mean, she's one of the best characters in Battlestar Galactica.
Who is she in Battlestar?
Admiral Kane.
Oh, Admiral Kane.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, Admiral Kane is great.
Yeah, that tells it all.
No, talking of Battlestar, this is maybe a little off topic, but once upon a time I sat down and I made a list. It was all the career changes, the many career changes of all of the characters in Battlestar Galactica. And you have like Gaius Baltar is a scientist, and then he's a politician, and then he's like a Jesus at the end of it, and all of this stuff. And like just the characters change constantly on that show. It's great. Like it's less of an arc. It's more like we're constantly evolving. We're constantly taking on new roles. We're constantly discovering new things. The characters are so dynamic on that show. Like it's incredible. It's great writing.
Well, it's got some similarities to Star Trek in that it's a ship in space and we see the adventure of the week. But they're the last of humanity, so they all have to be jack of all trades. They all have to be great at everything. Otherwise, humanity dies.
Yeah.
Whereas, and you can see that they throughout the show, the president keeps having this number on a whiteboard on a dry erase marker that it's like, oh, somebody died, have to change the number. And then her assistant comes in one week. I have a change for the population number. Oh, how many did we lose this time? Actually, somebody was born on this ship. We get to increase it.
Yeah.
Whereas the next generation, they had people leaving the ship and then coming to the ship all the time, because that's the nature of a work environment. Like an office tower.
Yeah.
People are starting work and finishing work all the time, moving on to other things, retiring. That's how what probably the one of the most effective love interests for Picard, I think, was the scientist who comes aboard the ship. And it's just a short posting, and they get into a relationship, and then she's in danger, and he's like, I can't function with you here because I can't make those decisions because you mean too much to me.
Yeah.
And that was like a huge slap in the face, like a huge wake up call. Like, holy shit, Picard's coming apart.
Yeah. It's nice that they can, like, they show characters who are as implacable as Kirk and Picard and Janeway and Cisco, and like you see them break, you see their flaws, you see, like, even the captain. We got to look to the captain. Captain will always point us in the right direction. Well, yeah, but maybe in so doing that a part of them goes, or maybe they don't always make the best decision. And Star Trek has the courage to do that. I think even in Battlestar Galactica, as good as the show was, when Adama was out of commission, everything went to hell, and then the solution was getting it back. You go, what have you done with my ship? And then things are kind of righted again. So it was still holding on to that, but in general, it had very good writing, very good character development. Like, it was always doing something new with the characters. They were always taking them to new places, and they felt legitimate. Like, I could, like, when Lee Adama is defending a traitor as a lawyer, when that becomes his profession at one point, it seemed earned. It seemed like, this is what this guy would stand up for. This seems exactly the kind of path he would go on. So it was very good at doing that.
Well,
not every show can.
What I really liked. Okay, so we've already discussed that Star Trek is generally very utopic, and so you look at the crew of the Enterprise D, Picard, Riker, Data, Troy, Crusher, Geordi. They're all striving to be better. The interesting thing about the Galactica crew is they're messed up, just like regular people. The Adama is he's a guy who's been passed over time and again, so he's a little bitter about that. But he's really good at what he does. And then when he got the ship, he brought his best friend to be his XO because the guy's a hard ass. But the guy can't keep his life together. So when Adama is out of commission, like, Adama realizes later, when he has to put somebody in command of the Pegasus, he doesn't put Colonel Ty in command of it, who would be the next logical choice because he's the next highest rank. He puts somebody else.
It was Lee, wasn't it?
Well, first it's the XO of the Pegasus, then it's the chief engineer he puts in command, and then he puts Lee in command. Because he knows Colonel Ty can't do the job. And Colonel Ty knows he can't do the job. The guy is a drunk and a screw up.
Colonel Ty is more like he'll keep the trains running on time, but oh man, you don't want him to make the schedule for those trains because they're going to be all off the track all over the place. He can keep your ship flying in the air, but don't put him in the pilot seat, man. That's not going to be good. And he knows that. That's the great thing. The character knows that. He knows I shouldn't be here.
Look at Starbuck. Starbuck is a prototypical, borderline autistic genius. She's amazing at this one thing, but she has almost no people skills. Like, she's a jerk. Lee is the affable leader that people look to because it's like, oh, we want him to be like his father. but the thing is, he's a shadow of his father. He doesn't have any. He's not like his father, and he's trying to prove
he's very idealistic too, which is his father is more.
He's trying to forge his own path.
He is, and he does. I would argue he does very much so.
So all of these characters are they're not dystopic, but they're very real. Like they have,
I would say,
major flaws, and they're not all trying to make themselves. They don't know how to make themselves better.
Yeah, I would say the dystopia comes from the fact that you have people in crisis mode. Like when I first started watching Voyager, I'd already seen Battlestar, and I kind of wanted Voyager to be more like Battlestar, because even though they're light years across the galaxy, they're far from home. They have to get home, and it's similar enough. We have to get to Earth, although we're being chased and things like that. Until the year of hell, really, on Voyager, everything looks good. Everything's clean. Okay, we got to get Dula berries because the replicators aren't working, but everybody is more or less comfortable. In Battlestar, there's that lovely, I think it's called like 42 or something, where every like 42 minutes or every like hour or something like that, like the Cylons just keep attacking. This is like episode 2 or something of the series. Everybody is beaten, they're worn down, they're like threadbare, they're barely hanging on mentally, and this is kind of what I wanted Voyager to be more like in the beginning. It's its own show, and I came to appreciate it its own way, but Battlestar is very much, we're in survival mode. We're literally being
desperation across. Like
it did it very well.
In the universe.
It did it very well.
And that's a huge contrast from the Next Generation, because the Next Generation has a federation of planets backing them up. So they get into tight spots, but it's like, okay, we can always retreat back to the Federation if we need to. Sometimes ships are lost, and the Enterprise is destroyed a bunch of times throughout the 7 seasons.
Yeah,
but they have a major, like they have a superpower backing them up, basically.
Yeah, and there are consequences. People do die. There are times things look dry. Like in the Drumhead, it looks like, discourse, the thing that has always been our advantage. We can be diplomatic and reasonable and use our words. Looks like it's going to undo us because of everything that's happening with this sedition. All of these accusations. It's like our language, the thing that saves us, might undo the Federation. They're literally talking about it. And they're like, it came this close. And then, of course, in DS9, you have, like, the war is about to destroy the Federation because they're up against an adversary they've never seen anything like before. And, of course, you have the Borg before that, which is just this unstoppable killing machine. So there are legit threats, but it always does revert back. But they're different universes, but I can appreciate both.
I think Star Trek is going to hold up better. The Next Generation is going to hold up better 20, 30 years from now, because it's the things that are within us are our true struggle. Whereas the Dominion War is an external threat. Battlestar Galactica is an external threat.
Well, even I would say it's
something that we created.
It's a commentary on technology and faith and all these kinds of things. Like there are a lot of ideas there that are very compelling, and of course, but again, you go back to the characters, right? I think the characters on that show, there's some great characters. I probably like the Star Trek ones better, but maybe that's because 4 seasons versus 7 seasons a piece.
I think that's why the
Enterprise
is to hold up better. I go back and I watch them with more regularity than Battlestar. And it's not just because of how new it is. The Next Generation ended 26 years ago. Battlestar ended like 12 years ago already. It started in 2002, so 18 years ago now.
Yeah, I do. I'll say this. I do rewatch Star Trek. I have not rewatched Battlestar. The thing that I still think about it fondly and things like that, but I haven't had the need to go back and rewatch. I've probably played the board game more times than I've actually.
I really would like to try that.
It's a fun game. There's better board games now. That's
when we can get out of isolation, I really want to try the Battlestar board game and also the Firefly board game.
I'll show you Rebellion. Star Wars Rebellion is a really good board
game. If there is
or the Star Trek board game. There's a couple of Star Trek board games that are really good.
We got to try. In the meantime, I have to wrap up. But
sounds like it.
my takeaway is Star Trek should do TV. They don't need to do movies because it doesn't do them the justice that they deserve. They make good movies, but they're not as good as their TV shows.
Now, would you say that experiment has been working as of late?
How's
Star Trek TV?
90s. But no, I'm Discovery and even Picard don't hold up to what they did in the 90s.
No.
I'll still watch them though because I just like Trek. This has been Trek Drek.
Signing off.
Make it so.
Yes.